By the late summer of 1942, the city of Stalingrad stood on the edge of a catastrophe that would become one of the most destructive battles in human history. What began as a strategic offensive along the Volga River soon transformed into a struggle measured not in miles, but in shattered buildings, ruined streets, and exhausted lives. Entire districts disappeared beneath artillery fire. Factories became fortresses. Apartment blocks became battlefields. As the fighting intensified, the city itself seemed to dissolve into rubble, and among the ruins lay countless soldiers and civilians caught in a conflict whose scale shocked even those who survived it. The Battle of Stalingrad emerged from a turning point in the Second World War. In 1941, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union had achieved enormous territorial gains, but the rapid victory anticipated by German planners failed to materialize. The Soviet state endured the initial shock and continued mobilizing its vast resources. By 1942, German leaders sought a new offensive capable of delivering a decisive strategic advantage. Their attention turned south toward the oil-rich regions of the Caucasus, whose resources were considered essential for sustaining military operations. Stalingrad occupied a critical position along the Volga River, one of the Soviet Union's most important transportation routes. Goods, fuel, military supplies. Reinforcements moved along the river system, linking distant regions of the country. Capturing the city would threaten Soviet logistics while protecting the northern flank of the German advance into the Caucasus. Its symbolic value also added significance. The city bore the name of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, making it a politically important objective for both sides. During the summer of 1942, German forces advanced rapidly across the southern Soviet Union. The offensive initially appeared successful. Vast stretches of territory fell under German control, and many observers believed Soviet resistance was weakening. Yet the distances involved were immense, supply lines grew longer, and Soviet forces continued regrouping despite repeated setbacks. As German troops approached Stalingrad, civilians found themselves increasingly exposed to the advancing front. Many residents worked in factories that produced weapons, vehicles, and military equipment. Others assisted in constructing defensive positions around the city. Although significant numbers of civilians were evacuated, many remained. Some could not leave in time. Others were required to support the war effort. As the danger increased, daily life became intertwined with military preparations. The first major catastrophe struck from the air. In August 1942, German bombing raids devastated large portions of the city. Waves of aircraft attacked industrial facilities, transportation networks, and residential districts. Fires spread across neighborhoods already damaged by explosions. Buildings collapsed. Infrastructure failed. Thousands of civilians were killed during these attacks, and many more were left homeless. The destruction transformed large sections of Stalingrad into fields of rubble before the main ground battle had even begun. Ironically, the devastation created conditions that complicated the German advance. The ruins provided countless defensive positions for Soviet soldiers. Streets became difficult to navigate. Large formations could not easily maneuver through collapsed structures and debris. The battle that followed would not resemble the sweeping offensives that had characterized earlier stages of the war. Instead, it became a brutal contest for individual buildings, staircases, rooms, and courtyards. By September, German forces had entered the city itself. The fighting quickly descended into close-range combat. Soviet defenders established strongpoints throughout industrial districts and residential areas. Every surviving structure could become a defensive position. Factory workshops, warehouses, railway stations, grain silos, and apartment blocks all acquired military significance. Soldiers often fought within sight of one another, separated only by walls, floors, or piles of rubble. The northern industrial zone became one of the most fiercely contested areas. Massive factories dominated the landscape, including the Red October steel factory, the Barricade weapons plant, and the Stalingrad tractor factory. These enormous complexes contained workshops, machinery, storage areas, and reinforced structures that offered protection from artillery and air attacks. Fighting surged through assembly halls and production floors. Positions changed hands repeatedly. In some areas, work continued on military equipment even as combat raged nearby. Control of the Volga River became equally important. Soviet forces relied on the river to bring reinforcements, ammunition, food, and medical supplies into the city. Despite constant shelling and air attacks, boats crossed the river under dangerous conditions. Many were damaged or destroyed, yet the crossings continued because the survival of the defenders depended on maintaining this connection to the eastern bank. As the battle intensified, casualties mounted at an extraordinary rate. Both armies suffered heavily. Assaults against fortified positions often resulted in severe losses. Artillery barrages reduced structures to fragments, while leaving defenders hidden within cellars and underground passages. Snipers operated throughout the ruins, targeting exposed soldiers and contributing to an atmosphere of constant danger. Even brief movements across open ground could prove fatal. The conditions endured by combatants were among the harshest of the war. Food was frequently scarce. Water could be difficult to obtain. Medical care often remained limited due to the intensity of the fighting and the destruction of infrastructure. Soldiers lived amid dust, smoke, shattered masonry, and the continuous sound of explosions. Sleep came in short intervals. Exhaustion became a constant companion. For civilians trapped within the city, survival was equally uncertain. Many sheltered in basements and damaged buildings while fighting raged overhead. Access to food and clean water steadily deteriorated. Families endured bombardment, displacement, and the loss of loved ones. The destruction of homes and public services made ordinary life nearly impossible. As weeks turned into months, the distinction between battlefield and civilian space largely disappeared. The struggle acquired a grim reputation for its relentless nature. Small gains demanded enormous effort. Single building could become the focus of repeated attacks and counterattacks. One famous example was a fortified apartment block, later known as Pavlov's house. Soviet defenders held the structure against numerous assaults, demonstrating how even modest positions could assume strategic importance within the urban battlefield. By October, German forces controlled much of the city, yet complete victory remained elusive. Soviet defenders continued holding narrow strips of territory along the Volga. Despite severe pressure, these positions prevented Germany from securing total control. Reinforcements crossed the river whenever possible, replacing some of the losses and maintaining resistance. Meanwhile, Soviet commanders were preparing a larger response beyond the city limits. While attention remained focused on the urban battle, Soviet forces assembled reserves on the flanks of the German position. These sectors were defended largely by Allied formations from Romania, Hungary, and Italy, whose equipment and resources were often less extensive than those available to German units. Soviet planners identified these areas as potential points of vulnerability. In November 1942, the strategic situation changed dramatically. Soviet forces launched Operation Uranus, a massive counteroffensive designed to encircle the German army fighting in Stalingrad. Attacks struck the weaker flanking positions north and south of the city. The offensive achieved rapid breakthroughs. Within days, advancing Soviet formations linked up west of Stalingrad, trapping a large German force inside the encirclement. The consequences were immediate and profound. What had been an offensive campaign suddenly became a desperate struggle for survival. Hundreds of thousands of German and Allied personnel found themselves surrounded. Supplies could no longer reach them by conventional means. German leadership initially hoped that air transport would sustain the encircled force until relief operations could arrive. In practice, the required supply levels proved impossible to maintain. As winter tightened its grip on the region, conditions deteriorated further. Temperatures dropped. Food shortages became severe. Fuel became scarce. Medical supplies ran low. Aircraft faced increasing difficulties delivering essential materials, while Soviet forces steadily compressed the pocket. The hardships endured by those trapped within the encirclement reflected the broader human cost of the campaign. Inside the ruined city, destruction reached an almost unimaginable scale. Entire districts had been reduced to wreckage. Roads disappeared beneath debris. Factories stood shattered. Residential neighborhoods became landscapes of broken walls and collapsed roofs. The remains of military equipment littered streets and open spaces. Everywhere, evidence of months of continuous combat marked the terrain. The battle's title and imagery would later become inseparable from the ruins themselves. Contemporary accounts described scenes of devastation that stretched across the urban landscape. The accumulation of casualties from prolonged combat created immense challenges for both sides. Ongoing fighting often made recovery efforts difficult or impossible. Many areas remained exposed to artillery fire or sniper activity, preventing safe access. The physical destruction of the city became intertwined with the immense human losses suffered there. In December, German attempts to break the encirclement failed to achieve their objective. Relief forces approached but could not reach the trapped army. Soviet resistance remained strong, and the strategic balance increasingly favored the encircling forces. The prospect of escape diminished with each passing week. By January 1943, the encircled German position had fragmented under sustained pressure. Supplies were nearly exhausted. Combat effectiveness declined sharply. Soviet attacks steadily reduced the remaining defensive areas. Command structures struggled to maintain coordination amid worsening conditions. The battle finally ended in early February 1943. The remaining German forces surrendered after months of combat that had transformed both the city and the course of the war. The victory represented a major turning point for the Soviet Union and for the broader conflict in Europe. German forces had suffered a defeat of unprecedented magnitude, while Soviet confidence and momentum increased significantly. The consequences extended far beyond the battlefield. Militarily, the outcome marked the beginning of a sustained shift in strategic initiative toward the Soviet Union. Politically, it strengthened international perceptions of Soviet resilience and contributed to changing expectations about the war's eventual outcome. Psychologically, the battle became a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and determination for generations that followed. The human cost was staggering. Soldiers from multiple nations, along with large numbers of civilians, were caught in a struggle that lasted for months and consumed vast resources. Casualty estimates vary across different categories and historical analyses, but historians agree that the battle ranks among the deadliest confrontations ever fought. The scale of suffering reflected not only the intensity of combat, but also the harsh conditions created by siege, bombardment, displacement, and winter. When the guns finally fell silent, Stalingrad remained standing in name, but scarcely in form. The city that had once stretched along the Volga as an industrial center had become a landscape of shattered factories, ruined homes, and broken infrastructure. Reconstruction would require years of effort, yet the memory of what occurred there endured long after the debris was cleared. Stalingrad remains historically significant, not simply because of the scale of destruction or the number of lives lost. Its importance lies in how the battle altered the direction of a global war. The struggle demonstrated the limits of military expansion, the importance of logistics and strategy, and the extraordinary endurance demanded of those caught within modern industrial warfare. In the ruins beside the Volga, a battle that began as part of a larger offensive became one of history's defining turning points, leaving a legacy that continues to shape how the Second World War is remembered today.